Hello and welcome to another VR2 on SI podcast. I'm Jake Nichols, your host. Glad to be joined by Matt Ray once again. A very busy weekend in Tennessee athletics and a lot coming again this week. But firstly, Matt, as always, how you doing?
Yeah, Jake, doing good. It's been a busy week for everybody on the Tennessee front. It's been across the board: football, baseball, and basketball.
Yeah, it absolutely has. So let's go ahead and get started with football. The Vols right now in their last week of spring practice before that orange and white game, the first such endeavor under Josh Heupel. They will take the field at Neyland Stadium on Saturday to a free admission crowd, and parking is free as well. Again, for that orange and white game at Neyland Stadium, likely we'll have kind of the same background as that open practice, just pulling up to G10 and maneuvering in your way into the stadium from there. But getting right into the thick of things on the football recruiting front. So, Matt, the first two commitments of the Josh Heupel era made their commitments to Tennessee this past week. Elijah Herring out of Riverdale, and then Vincent Sneed out of Florida. So, firstly, we've talked about Elijah Herring for a while, talked about his big play ability at that outside linebacker spot and what he could bring to Tennessee. Not a big splash, but still a very, very solid commitment for that first for Josh Heupel, and certainly big that Tennessee got one out of an in-state guy for that first commitment for Heupel.
Yeah, when you think about quiet recruitments in general, you think about Elijah Herring. He's a quiet kid. He's laid back. He's reserved. But Tennessee's, they continued to surge, continued to push. Michigan made him a priority kind of down the stretch. A mix of schools when you look at it. So there was a chance that if you didn't get on Elijah Herring now and get in the door, that if his senior season goes according to plan, the competition could have really got heavier, and Tennessee was able to grab Elijah Herring and put him in this class. And he's very excited about his opportunity at Tennessee. And the more I've talked to Elijah, I've talked to him a pretty good bit in the last couple of months. He's out at 7-on-7s. He's working his game to get better, to be a 3-down linebacker. And I think that's what you can kind of expect from him. Is some schools are recruiting him to play in the middle, some schools recruiting him as an outside linebacker, or some schools recruiting him just as an edge that can really rush the passer. So I think you're going to get a guy that once he settles in on where he wants to be and can focus, Elijah Herring's willing to put in the work. He's a guy that comes to work every single day, handles his business, goes home, works on getting better, and comes back and does it again. Runs track, plays 7-on-7, handles his grades, handles everything on that front. So for Tennessee, for Josh Heupel, you come in your opening press conference and you start talking about, securing your borders. There's a lot of good talent in the state of Tennessee this year. And, Tennessee's going to continue to battle for a lot of those guys all the way to the end, regardless of what their top 5 looks like, what their top 3 looks like, where they commit, later this year. Some guys do have decision timelines already set. Tennessee's going to continue to battle there. But to be able to get a guy, to be able to use Elijah Herring to start that class, a guy that, has a lot of respect from his peers because of the way he carries himself, that's big for Josh Heupel and company.
Now, Matt, we also want to mention Vincent Sneed, the strong side defensive end out of Winter Park, Florida. Obviously, you were able to get down there and get an exclusive with him whenever he made that announcement, and just really be able to detail the excitement that he and his family have over his choice in Tennessee and his relationship with this staff. What did you hear from Vincent, and what is Tennessee getting in the Florida product that's so widely regarded right now, Matt?
Yeah, so that's been the Vincent Sneed commitment has been a long time coming for Tennessee. Tennessee, made him a priority from the time that Alex Golish and Josh Heupel really got to campus and were able to get their feet under them and start working. Had a previous relationship there from Orlando, a group that he really liked. Sneed lives in Florida now, but has lived in Alabama in his life, been to Tennessee, the state of Tennessee throughout the years on several occasions, used accustomed to travel. So, moving from Florida is not a big deal to him. That's actually something that he's probably the most excited about right now. But yeah, spent a pretty good time with him and his family down in Winter Park. Great family, very excited, as I alluded to in the tweet. A lot of orange out in Central Florida on that Saturday morning back on March 27th when we actually shot that commitment video. His timeline did move around a little bit. Obviously he had something, set in stone, but he knew we were coming to Orlando, wanted to work with us because he knew that at the end of the day, that's where, he was going. It was Tennessee. He actually moved his timeline up, but, for Vincent Sneed, it was, for us on that day, it was kind of not letting everybody in the neighborhood know that what that orange was for.
Right.
But, with Sneed again, a lot of, respect for Rodney Garner and what he can do for his career. Just a lot of respect for Josh Heupel, but really it was an entire staff effort for Tennessee here. Angela Brummett, the people on the recruiting staff really made Sneed feel like he was a priority. That the same day that we did the commitment interview on March 27th, they hosted him, a couple of hours later on an orange carpet, virtual junior day type thing. And he was very excited about that, was able to see a lot, has continued to do virtual tours. He kind of saw everything. He's set for his official visit. This is a guy Tennessee views as a 5 technique that has the ability to move inside or outside depending on how his body develops. So a guy that Tennessee is excited about, as they've recruited him hard since they've been here, and a guy that's excited about coming to Tennessee. And if you're Josh Heupel and the staff right now, that's what you need.
Right. Now, Matt, before we get into a little bit more on practice and then going forward into some basketball and baseball updates, we would be remiss if we didn't discuss the decision of the Wade twins out of Summit and Murfreesboro. Obviously, Destin and Keaton going with the Kentucky Wildcats over Tennessee in that move announced last Friday. So, Matt, obviously, Destin knows from what he's been told by Kentucky that he can be a top quarterback prospect there, that's what they want him for. And then Keaton can obviously fit in well on the defensive side of the football. But according to an article from Joseph Spears of the Tennessean, it did come down to the Wildcats and the Vols. And part of that final decision was the move to be able to play quarterback for Destin and just the relationship that they had with the Wildcats from the get-go. So what does Josh Heupel have to do going forward to really get some more of these in-state kids in the 22 class? Because even if it is just from a perception point of view, then the Wade twins, were a big loss. So what does he have to do to kind of recover from that going forward?
Well, I think when you look at it, I saw Destin and Keaton both this weekend at a 7-on-7 in Atlanta. Talked to both of them for a pretty good bit. Those guys, it really did come down to that initial relationship with Kentucky. The Wildcats have been there for going on 2 years. That's tough to beat. Jeremy Pruitt and company got in the race late. They didn't really prioritize either of those guys. Josh Heupel did, and Tennessee certainly surged. And that was a tough recruitment to read for a while. And the Vols had momentum, there was no doubt. But Tennessee was also the first trip that either one of those guys had taken. And despite the fact that you can't get face to face with the coaches, you can still do so much. You're on the phone with them. You're able to talk to them. You're able to do, a lot of, you're able to talk to them on the phone there. So you're able to still kind of get some of that experience, as you tour campus on your own. And there are such things as visit highs. And I'm not saying that's what happened for Destin, or Keaton in that instance, but, Tennessee had momentum, about 4 weeks ago. But, at the end of the day, you go where you feel comfortable. Both of those guys felt comfortable at Kentucky. They sold Destin on being the quarterback in this class. It's pretty easy for Kentucky to sell, being an edge rusher in a Mark Stoops defense. That's, they selling Keaton on being a 3-down linebacker. So again, I think for Josh Heupel and company, it's an uphill battle, and that's not a fault of theirs. That they're just behind the 8 ball from the time that he took the job. There was always going to be ground to make up. He hasn't made excuses about that. He's continued to work the state of Tennessee hard. He has added some quality in-state walk-ons. Just as we're recording this podcast, just minutes ago, added Jared Gentry from Briarcrest and Memphis. A guy that was on the All-State selection last year. Looks like he has high upside. So Josh Heupel and company are working the in-state recruiting grounds as hard as they can. But, unfortunately, with some of these guys, you've got teams that are established. You've got Ohio State, you've got Georgia's, you've got Clemson's involved in the mix. So that makes it tough. That makes it tough for Tennessee to battle and continue to try to win on, high-profile prospects that they would like that are within the state when they haven't been able to put a product on the field yet, and there's looming NCAA questions.
Right. And Matt, going forward on one more aspect of that tough recruitment cycle so far for Josh Heupel, what can you say just about the flexibility and versatility of this offense and what he wants to do on defense, that even though Tennessee may not be getting all of those top 20, top 25 guys in the state for 2022, that, like you said, they're still adding those walk-ons, that they're still getting those valuable pieces, even though they may not be those biggest names across the state?
Well, yeah, I think when you look at it, if this was Jeremy Pruitt and the system that he runs or chose to run on both sides of the ball, you probably want to hit the panic button. But for Josh Heupel, it's on both sides of the ball. It's being creative, being able to get guys to do multiple things, or it really freeing guys up to make plays, not. I don't want to say that there's not as much of a system, because there is, but again, with the stuff that Josh Heupel does offensively, he can find playmakers that can thrive in that system in other recruiting areas. He can go out and grab a guy that may be under the radar, and they'll come in and thrive. Defensively, when you look at how multiple Tennessee's going to be, that gives them a lot of flexibility, kind of like you're talking about, Jake. So, yeah, it's been a tough recruiting cycle early. We'll see what happens with visits. This weekend coming up, obviously, there's going to be some guys on campus. Already have talked to a few guys that are planning to be there right now. Cam Miller, the Memphis receiver, is planning to come in. He was at Alabama's spring game last weekend. He's a guy that Tennessee and company have prioritized. He would be a big piece, to the in-state class if Tennessee was able to land him. The Foley kid, the tight end out of Ohio, is planning to make a return trip. A guy that Tennessee really likes. They think he can do a lot of things as an inline tight end or flexed out. So, there's going to be guys come in this weekend. There's going to be guys continue to trickle through campus as school starts to end, and then when things hit June 1, it's going to get crazy on the recruiting front. So, no need to hit the panic button yet. For me, all bets are kind of off until June 1. There's going to probably be so many visitors start coming through campus on random days of the week even, that it's going to be, ridiculously difficult to keep up with. So that's when recruiting is going to get exciting. And then when that month ends, let's see what the NCAA chooses to do there. But when that month ends, then we'll see guys really start pushing towards a decision, and we'll see a little bit more about what Josh Heupel and company can sell on the recruiting trail.
Right. But as far as selling on the field, certainly a big point this weekend coming in that orange and white game. As mentioned, that's going to be this Saturday at Neyland Stadium, free admission, free parking. And that does start at 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you plan to go, then you need to plan on wearing a face covering. It says that those will be required for admission for fans that are going to be inside Neyland Stadium. Now, as for the players that are going to be on the field, going back to a practice report from today, according to something I read moments ago from Trey Wallace from Rocky Top Insider, Walker Merrill is in a brace right now, was not in pads this afternoon. Elijah Simmons was not in pads either. The Pearl Cone product walking around in a boot. And then other than that, Matt, just Tennessee getting ready for that spring game and just trying to kind of showcase what they can do whenever they're able to really get a full-on scrimmage in front of fans for that first kind of full 11 on 11 under Josh Heupel.
Yeah, so for for Josh Heupel, we'll start there. This is the first test to me. I felt like the open practice that he held was probably the most efficient open practice that I've watched at Tennessee in the last several years.
Right.
But for me, Josh Heupel, this is the first test. I think he's handled the media well. I think he's done, everything about as well as he can do so far. But, you're talking about it's going to be on TV for people to watch. There's going to be a lot more people there than there were at the open practice, as long as the weather holds off, which is not looking great for Saturday right now. But there's still going to be people, come out to the orange and white game on Saturday. Tennessee going to be playing football. It's not just going to be a practice. It's going to be Tennessee's going to play football. So, a lot there. People are going to be looking. They're going to be watching the quarterbacks. Going to be watching how Heupel coaches. Different things like that. Get a little bit more idea of how Tennessee's going to play. And then as far as, the practice report part that you touched on, you did leave one injury off of the injury list, which is why we don't have a practice report today. Jake was out with an injury today. So that's why we don't have our practice report today.
That is true.
He is recovering. He will be back later this week for practice. We always appreciate Trey Wallace, what he does, how he works. And as he mentioned, Walker Merrill in a leg brace, Elijah Simmons in a boot. No real update on our end from Simmons. We do expect Merrill to be back closer to the fall, coming, sometime in the summer, coming out of camp, depending on how things go there for him, as he was in a brace today. We'll see what happens with that. And I'm sure Josh Heupel will take some questions over that later in the week after the spring game. But yeah, for Tennessee, ultimately it's trying to come out of the orange and white game healthy, trying to get guys better, trying to create competition. And I think there's going to be a lot of competition at Tennessee this fall at a lot of different spots. You're going to have more pieces coming in. You're going to have Kamen Marley coming here, who's an athlete that can do a little bit of everything. So where's Tennessee going to find a home for him? You've got Julian Nixon, who's going to come in that's going to be looking to play somewhere. You've got Amari McNeil and Jeremiah Crawford, who will both be here this fall, that are going to, look to come in and battle for a tackle spot where Tennessee needs bodies. You've got Deshaun Rucker, who just looks like and plays like the prototypical nickel cornerback. Where's he going to find a spot in Tennessee secondary this fall? So a lot of question marks there. And I think that the orange and white game will really, push the envelope towards the competition heating up this fall. Everybody's going to, get an opportunity. The storylines are going to start coming out. They're going to start building. And then, that's where things turn, full steam ahead for Josh Heupel in June and July. For me, I think that's the biggest thing to watch this weekend is, where is there anybody on the field that their job is kind of safe right now? I think that's going to be the interesting part to watch. If I was kind of guessing up front, I would say that Cade Mays and Cooper Mays may be the two guys that have locked in a spot at this point. But, elsewhere, I think everything's pretty wide open. So I think that's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, Matt. And as you mentioned, a lot of thanks to Trey for all he does over at RTI. He's a great guy to work with, great guy to be around, and always provides fantastic insight. But one last stop in football before we continue on to the hardwood and the baseball diamond, getting into quarterbacks. Obviously, that is what is on everyone's mind right now. Joe Milton, the transfer from Michigan, coming in. He is officially in Tennessee's student directory. And Matt, that will be quite a battle with Virginia Tech transfer Hendon Hooker. Milton last season at Michigan was inconsistent. He had only 5 starts for 1,077 yards, 4 touchdowns. Hendon Hooker obviously has come in and looked the part in some ways, but has also looked like he has struggled to adapt to this offense and others. But I think those two are considered the front runners right now. But Tennessee certainly a wise move in adding another quarterback if they felt like they didn't quite have what they needed at that position so far this spring.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you look at a lot of the the optics around Milton, you start getting, why is Tennessee adding another quarterback? Why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Right now Tennessee has three, scholarship quarterbacks participating. Caden Salter is still suspended indefinitely, and there's no certainty around his status moving forward, or if he will be back at all. This isn't something that Tennessee blindsided their quarterbacks with by any, stretch of the imagination. They sat down with these guys and had a conversation and informed them that they were active in the portal and that they wanted, to try to add another guy. This is a couple of weeks ago. Joe Milton has been to campus, so there was kind of no secret that Joe Milton was coming to Tennessee, and there was no secret to the quarterback room, and I think when you look at Hendon Hooker, Joe Milton, both those guys, big physical runners that can, throw the ball, but struggle with consistency, have both been starters, have really never been able to, put a real hold on that job, which is why they're both at Tennessee. So I think that quarterback room, is very interesting. If Salter comes back and nobody leaves, you've got 5 scholarship quarterbacks that are capable of producing. But let's say hypothetically Salter doesn't come back and somebody leaves. Then you've got 3 scholarship quarterbacks going into the fall, and I just don't think that's what any coach wants. So, we'll see. Coming out of the scrimmage this weekend, Tennessee's quarterbacks just didn't have a great week. They just didn't have a great Saturday scrimmage. They kind of struggled, saw a few throws on some highlight videos, but in talking to some people, Tennessee's quarterbacks didn't have a great outing. So, we'll see how they look at the orange and white game. But again, Tennessee's quarterbacks are still learning this install. So, if Joe Milton can come in and pick it up, he's got a chance to come in and compete for the job, or else he would not be coming here. No athlete's really coming to sit on the bench. So Joe Milton is going to come to compete for the starting job at Tennessee, and it just adds another, element to the quarterback room that Tennessee, can use. If you look back in years past, I think Jeremy Pruitt's biggest criticism, biggest flaw, whatever you want to call it, was the fact that he didn't have another quarterback ready to go. Well, Josh Heupel's proving that that's not going to be the case for him. And I don't think anybody expected it to be, but for Josh Heupel, he's got a few quarterbacks that are serviceable at this stage of the game. We'll see how those guys look on Saturday. We'll see how, that shakes out, if somebody can really, impress and get some buzz around their name heading into the fall. We'll see what happens there. But Joe Milton is certainly interesting. It's something that's been in the works for a while. It's something that these quarterbacks knew about. It's probably a little bit of a driving factor for them. So Saturday, the quarterback play is going to be interesting to watch.
Right, and it should be interesting as well to see how Joey Housley's development works in spreading to that very different kind of arsenal with each guy in terms of just what they bring to the table. So speaking of bringing things to the table, we're going to switch over to the hardwood and talk about some basketball recruiting. Tennessee basketball had a huge week in recruitment, one that was capped off by the announcement of John Fulkerson making his return to Tennessee for a 6th and final season. But first, going into some of those new teammates for Fulkerson. First up, Jonas Idu, 6'11", out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Misread my notes there for a moment. But Matt, Idu, obviously a big relationship with him, with Tennessee's coaching staff, especially considering the transition from Marquette, or from his commitment to Marquette. and a lot of upside for a guy that can be a big presence early for Tennessee down low and maybe take some of that load off John Fulkerson.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tennessee transformed the front court. No way around it. That's what they did. And you bring in you bring in Huntley Hatfield, you bring John Fulkerson back to mentor these guys, and all of a sudden, this Tennessee team looks really, really complete.
Right. And, that's without even talking about the additions of, Kennedy Chandler, Jemai Mashak, and then Quentin DeBunje as well. 6'6" out of Montverde Academy. Obviously, he and Kennedy Chandler faced off in that Geico National Championship. Quentin talked to me a little bit last week about what that was like and what he's looking forward to about he and Kennedy being able to play together and really making that a strong 2021 class for Tennessee and representing along with Jemai Mashak. So we will have that coming out here in the next week. But like you said, with Brandon Huntley Hatfield, the Clarksville product via IMG Academy, and then Fulkerson also, even in his media availability earlier today, Matt, whenever he talked about coming back, not just as a sixth-year senior, but as that player coach and being able to really help develop these younger guys and, knowing that system that Rick Barnes has and what he wants and what he expects. Now more than ever, I think that will be vital because we've seen how hard Rick Barnes is on his point guards. We've seen how hard he is on young guys in general to try to shape them into the way that he wants them to be early. You look at the way that he treated Grant Williams when he came in, reshaped his entire body, the way that he was riding Jordan Bone his entire freshman year, Lamonte Turner, especially, like I said, at that point guard spot. So I think it will be really vital for the relationship between John Fulkerson and Kennedy Chandler. And then with Santiago Vescovi as well, just knowing what Barnes expects and knowing what Tennessee can expect of Chandler early on. But yeah, a lot of excitement around this Tennessee basketball roster coming in, and one that is completely revamped going into this next season.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if John Fulkerson could go out anyway, I think it would be knowing that he left the kind of impact on Tennessee's program, that, set the stage for years to come. And when you look at Tennessee's roster, there's a lot of pieces. Not all these guys are going to go pro. Not all these guys are going to go one and done. So if he can come back and you look at the other pieces that are still there and the pieces that are coming in, and he can kind of embody that player coach role and talk about, where Tennessee's been at their highest of highs under Rick Barnes and where they've been at their lowest of lows and work through the challenges for those guys. He even discussed today that he felt like Tennessee should be rated a little higher in the preseason rankings. And admittedly, that's not something that he watches a lot, but he feels like this Tennessee team can do something special. And it certainly feels like Rick Barnes took all the steps to make the Volunteers special this upcoming season.
Right. And Matt, before we go any further, I think I did want to allude a little more to just Fulkerson specifically, because, you can talk about how pivotal all these guys around him are and all the roster changes are. But for Fulkerson specifically, he said that he had his mind made up to come back to Tennessee before any of these moves were announced, that his main motive is wanting to finish out his Tennessee career on his terms. And so for that, Matt, I thought about it ironically earlier today, but knowing that, it's really ironic when you look back at that moment in Nashville when he collapsed after Omar Payne elbowed him twice. Tennessee fans obviously were just livid at Payne at the moment, as was the entire country, for really putting two cheap shots into one of the SEC's most beloved players. But looking back, Tennessee can almost thank Omar Payne, because that moment is what drove John Fulkerson ultimately to come back to Tennessee. He said he was looking for a sign from God that this is what he was supposed to do, that he had some unfinished business. And lo and behold, that injury in Nashville and not being able to recall his last game in a Tennessee uniform was what made him want to come back and be on Rocky Top for one more year. So, Matt, a lot of storylines there and maybe a little bit of irony, but ultimately Tennessee gets the incredible Folk back for one more season.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at it, it's just a great story. You're just talking about a kid that just loves everything Tennessee, and he has one more chance to do it all over again. And that's what he's going to get to do. And he has generated his fair share of headlines, rightfully so. Since the announcement, as everybody kind of waited anxiously to see what happened with him. And when you talk about generating the fair share of headlines, Jake, you can't dismiss Tony Vitello's baseball program right now.
You absolutely
can. Kind of switch gears here with you for a second. You were there for all three games, and over the weekend series with Vanderbilt, and you put out a great column about what it was like, what you saw. But walk me through that first pitch when Tennessee took the field against Vanderbilt in game one, a game that was really dominated by Kumar Rocker. But, what was the atmosphere like just throughout the weekend from pitch one until, it kind of became apparent that the Vols were going to lose the series there late in game three against Vanderbilt?
Matt, I think that regardless of circumstance, I mean, whether you're talking about that first pitch of game one, whether you're talking about that final pitch in game three, the atmosphere was electric like I've never seen before in Lindsey Nelson Stadium. I don't know if it was just Vanderbilt. I'm not sure if it was the top 5 ranking. Probably a combination of both, and the fact that this has become a really, really exciting team to watch. But the atmosphere was to a completely different level this weekend at Tennessee's home field. And whenever Chad Dallas took the bump for that very first pitch, just the feeling was palpable that it wasn't necessarily tense, like you cut it with a knife, but it was so electric that, to continue with, I guess, a silverware euphemism, that you'd almost want to take it off and spoon feed it to the rest of the athletic department. That was how electric it was this entire weekend, just because of the atmosphere that Tennessee and Tony Vitello have created. So obviously, like you said, Kumar Rocker absolutely dominated in that first game, got 8 strikeouts, shut Tennessee down for 7 straight innings. You knew he was going to be emotional coming in. You knew that he has history, obviously, with Tennessee, with Tracy Rocker having coached at Tennessee, Kumar's dad as the defensive line coach, and then with Kumar having a bad experience against the Vols his freshman season, and then with the weekend before last, whenever he allowed 3 home runs in the first loss of his college career against Georgia. So there was going to be motivation there, and he came out and showed it. At one point, the cameras even caught him saying, I'm here, I'm bleeping here, that he was juiced up, and he showed it with the pitching that he showed on Friday night. But man, Saturday, well, actually, I'll go to Sunday first. That's the way I had written this column, and kind of the way that I wanted to establish my thoughts on the Tony Vitello era so far, and especially with this weekend. Sunday was another tough day for Tennessee. Got out to another good start with back-to-back homers in the bottom of the first inning to take that 2-1 lead over Vanderbilt. As I mentioned, the atmosphere then just electric as well. But then Vanderbilt able to do a lot in the middle of the innings there, especially with Enrique Bradfield Jr., who, Matt, if you don't know the name, you will by the end of this baseball season, because the freshman is absolutely elite. He leads the SEC in stolen bases right now, and he absolutely put that to good use against Tennessee this weekend, had 4 stolen bases and scored from third on a pop-up to short. Matt, after tagging from third, raced home and beat Jackson Greer on Sunday, beat the throw to score to make it 9-3 Vanderbilt. And he was just electric. But now going back to Saturday, obviously Vanderbilt's experience dominated in that first game, and then in the third game whenever their bats got hot. But Saturday, as I mentioned in that column, was absolutely magical for Tennessee. Jack Leiter dominated early, another possible draft pick for the Commodores, as is Kumar Rocker. but Leiter got off to a good start, was able to shut Tennessee down. But then all of a sudden, Connor Pavoloni and Evan Russell jacked back-to-back homers off of him. Vanderbilt pulls Leiter, and Evan Russell having 2 homers already in the game. That 8th inning, which again I wrote that in my column. You can go read that right now on our VR2 on SI site online just about this weekend. But when Evan Russell walked up for that 8th inning at bat, having those 2 bombs already, the bases loaded, Tennessee trailing, the feeling was almost indescribable. The fans knew what he had done already. They knew the potential there, and they knew, especially with Jack Leiter having been taken out and Vanderbilt reliever Luke Murphy in his place, that there was a chance. And lo and behold, Evan Russell connected on that very first pitch, sent it over the left field wall. And I think Tony Vitello did have a good point. He said after that game that with that energy in the park, that maybe the fans blew that last one over because it didn't look like it was quite there, and then miraculously kind of found its way over the wall. And so when you go back and watch that video, you can see whenever Russell's bat connects that Enrique Bradfield retreated back to the wall and was kind of waiting on it. So, you thought that maybe it wouldn't quite go the distance, and then lo and behold, went right over the wall. But Matt, it again was indescribable. The amount of intensity and the amount of excitement that Tony Vitello has brought to this team is really something to be admired. And it's also not something to be ignored by Danny White either going forward, because Vitello has absolutely revitalized this program. You look at the line that was outside before game 1, stretching back behind the fence. You look at, just like I said, the magic in game 2, and even the willingness for people to stick around in game 3, hoping for that rally once Vanderbilt got up by 5, 6, 7 runs. It was really just something incredible. And, that the Commodores did take 2 of 3 from Tennessee this weekend. And yes, it would have been nice for Tennessee to clinch the top spot in the SEC East. Obviously, Tim Corbin's club is very well experienced. They've got 2 national titles in the past 5 College World Series. But the showing that Tennessee had this weekend is really something to be admired. And the way that the fans just flocked to see the Vols this weekend, it really makes you excited for whenever the same effect can happen for Josh Heupel's football program, if it does.
Yeah, it really does. You talk about Tony Vitello and Danny White, and I have a close friend that is a retired Division I umpire that's worked at Tennessee several times, and it seems that every time Tennessee plays a weekend series here for the past month, I get a message that says Tennessee has to pay Tony Vitello. Tennessee has to pay Tony Vitello. And, I think for Danny White, this is what he talked about, and Tony Vitello is leading the way with this athletic department. But you can see it. You can see the camaraderie in the athletic department. You see the football team out. You see the basketball team out. You're going to see, these other programs out supporting other programs. You see the coaching staffs doing things, kind of in mass. They're tweeting about things. They're excited about things. They're talking about that. That's what it's going to take to get Tennessee athletics as a whole, back to where it needs to be. Tennessee needs all the positive buzz that they can get, and Josh Heupel knows that. It's going to help him on the recruiting trail. A lot of times, when you're recruiting, football, you're recruiting baseball or you're recruiting basketball too, and there's so many instances that you see that. And if you have an elite program and all of the above, you're more likely to land that kid. So, we'll see what happens, but it's an exciting time, or at least a busy time right now on Rocky Top for the last week. We'll be back again later this week on Thursday as Jake gets back out to practice observations. Then on Saturday, we'll be at the Orange and White game all day working, and we will try to take some mailbag questions from you guys later in the week. But Jake, I think this is going to do us for now.
Yeah, Matt, I think it will. Like you said, I'll be back out there later this week. And for anybody wondering, I am not in a boot like Elijah Simmons was.